Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I had this encounter about a year ago, but I started thinking about it quite a bit recently. I also wanted to add that while I don't fully dismiss the paranormal, I don't really believe in ghosts, cryptids, and such. This encounter didn't really change my mind about that. I had decided to go on a solo hiking trip for about 2 weeks. This would have been my second time doing something like this. The first 2 days of the hike were very average and relaxing, just a simple hike, but at night things got a little bit weird. I went to sleep at around 21 or 22 and nothing much happened until around 2. I remember smelling a faint stench of rotting meat. It wasn't anything too crazy, but it was weird enough to somewhat wake me up. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. But then I started to notice that something was moving around my tent. I did think that because of the smell and the sounds that it could be some carnivorous animal that maybe stank of rotting meat for whatever reason. But since I was still half asleep, I wanted to make sure it's not a bear or something, so I opened my eyes to check around. Now just to note that during that night the moon was quite bright, so it was possible to see quite well outside. So when I opened my eyes I could see a vague, lanky humanoid shadow outside my tent. I didn't feel like I was in danger or anything. I did have a sidearm with me, so even if it was some creep I didn't really feel threatened while holding a gun. After about a minute the guy left and the smell also disappeared, but since it was a very creepy encounter I stayed awake for about an hour, and after nothing else happened I went back to bed. The next day I had that weird feeling of being watched by something dangerous, but I don't know if it was because I was confident in my ability to protect myself or whatever. I didn't feel like I was in any danger at all, I just felt creeped out. I didn't really enjoy that day all that much, to be fully honest, and because of that I set up camp a lot faster than I usually did. I didn't go to bed at my normal time since I didn't want someone sneaking up on me again. At around 1 I could smell that weird smell again, so I gripped my gun a little bit tighter and tried to find the guy. But instead all I saw were just a pair of yellowish eyes in the distance. I stared at them for about 5 minutes and then they just vanished together with the smell. I didn't feel like I was being watched anymore during that night, so after an hour I decided to go to sleep. The next day the feeling of being watched was back, but again, I didn't feel as though I was in any danger at all. I decided that even though I felt that way I would still rather cut this trip short instead of actually getting into a situation where I am in danger, so I started making my way back, though through a more roundabout path. Nothing really happened that night. The next day I suddenly could smell that rotten stench. It wasn't any stronger than before, but since I was in a decently large clearing at that time and didn't see anyone or anything around me, I panicked a little bit and started walking at a faster pace. I'm not exactly sure on how long I walked after that, but around midday the stench got stronger. Now I think that it's important to note that I don't have the best vision and I should wear glasses, but I don't most of the time. So when I looked around me and saw a gray humanoid figure quite far away to my left, I did panic, but by the time I put my glasses on it was gone. After that I really didn't feel like staying there for much longer, so I started doing a slow run to get out of there faster. I had run quite a distance while feeling something following me, but then I ran into this strangely peaceful clearing where both the stench and the feeling of being watched stopped. It was a relatively small clearing with a few small boulders around, but the strange thing was that a man who was in his late 40s or maybe even early 50s was sitting on one of the boulders. He was wearing very plain dad clothes, definitely not something you would be wearing while hiking in the middle of nowhere. Plus he had no gear anywhere near him. But the thing that I noticed first about that guy was his strangely bright green eyes. They weren't bright in the literal sense, but more like the kind of brightness you would see in the eyes of a child. After running for so long I was exhausted, and the man noticed that and told me to sit down on one of the boulders and rest. I didn't even think about it and sat down. We talked for a while, mostly about hiking and nature, and while talking he had this very friendly smile that made me feel at ease. When I had rested he offered to help me build my campsite in the clearing. He was very good at starting a fire. We shared a cup of tea and he told me that it was very nice talking to me, but he has to go now. He didn't really say why or where he had to go, but he just stood up and left. That night I didn't hear any noises other than a few birds and crickets. When I woke up the next day I felt very refreshed. I packed up and started to continue along the trail. I didn't feel like I was being watched or smelled that stench at all during the rest of my hike. This was the first time I've told the story in full detail. I usually say that some animal or whatever was following me, since that way people would actually believe me, but I decided to actually write exactly what happened.
Well, here is my ghost story. I guess I was about 9 years old in the winter of 1971. We lived in a cinder block home with concrete floors. being we were poor and my mother did her best to raise 4 children by herself. We had been living in this house since the summer of '67, and saw or heard nothing unusual. That is until one cold winter night in 1971. At this time it was just my mother, myself and my 7-year-old sister still residing in the home. My mother moved me into the bedroom she and my sister shared. I had my own separate bed. She had closed off my bedroom to conserve needed heat that we were getting from an old-fashioned kerosene heater. We had all gone to bed around 9:30 p.m. and were asleep for a few good hours, I'm sure, when I suddenly woke up for no reason, which I generally slept through every night until about 7 a.m. I awoke staring at my window, wondering why I was awake and so clear-headed looking out my window as I lay in the bed. While I was questioning myself, I had a strange feeling of being watched, so I slowly turned to my left side to check on my mother and sister in their bed across the room. It was then that I saw an elderly-looking man sitting in the chair beside my bed, looking directly at me. I blinked and stared right back at this apparition, and it was still there. He looked a lot like my grandfather, who was still alive, maybe in his late 60s, white thinning hair, gentle shaven face, white short-sleeved shirt with gray or brown slacks. He just sat there looking at me as though he knew me. Instead of being scared, I felt a sudden peace about the weird situation. Any other time I would have been screaming my head off. I simply felt happy, rolled back over in bed and fell fast asleep. I never told my mother, sister, or anyone about what I observed that night. 11 years later, we were all together as a family on Christmas Eve and conversing about our individual past childhoods. Each of us foretold a silly or special moment when we were growing up and the whole family would laugh and smile. It was my turn, and I told how much I cherished the past times in our old house and the few happy adventures I had with my young friends in the neighborhood. Finally, it was my sister's turn and she followed by saying this.
You know, brother, I liked the house too, but I never cared for that ghost that I saw there.
Chills broke out all over me, and I stuttered slightly when I asked her to tell us what she saw, among my brothers snickering.
I woke up suddenly and immediately felt that we were being watched. I looked around in the bedroom and there he was, standing in the bedroom doorway facing us, just staring at us while we were sleeping in our beds.
I asked her, what did he look like?
He looked a lot like our grandfather, was about maybe 70 years old, white-haired, slightly taller than our grandfather, was wearing a white shirt and dark pants. He just stood there looking at us. I took a second look and he seemed to smile. I simply felt calm and fell back asleep.
The room kind of got quiet and I spoke out to my sister. I saw the same old gentleman myself, sitting in the chair between our beds. My sister could only recall that it was a cold night and that she was still young and I was in the same room in the other bed, which made me believe it was around the same year that I witnessed him also. I was spooked by her story and went away shaking my head, even though it confirmed what I myself had seen 11 years earlier. Now about 6 years later in early 1988, I was going through a crisis moment in my life and was up one night searching for badly needed answers. I had been an atheist for about 7 years, but my military experiences and watching the births of our first 2 children opened my mind up to the possibility that there just might be a God after all. That night I cried out, "If you are real and out there, I need you now. Please talk to me." Suddenly a soft but authoritative voice spoke to me in the darkness of our living room. He declared himself, but then I quickly got angry and hurled an insult at him. "Where were you when I was young, fatherless, hungry and cold?" His answer was gentle.
Remember the nights you prayed to me while standing over your mother, who was sleeping, asking me to protect her and your siblings. So I did, by sending you one of my servants to watch over you during the hard times.
My tears suddenly stopped and I recalled the prayers I had spoken to him as a boy, and the old man that my sister and I had seen so many years ago. I felt shame for what I said moments earlier, for God had always been watching over me and had responded to my earlier request to help my mother get us through another day. That supposed ghost was an angel of God, one that he had sent at the request of a 9-year-old needy boy. I will always cherish what I experienced that night.
This occurred in the late 80s. I was on a trip to Bangkok via Manila. In my hotel room on the morning of the second day there, I was sitting on the bed at about 10 in the morning, working on a draft of an article I was writing. Deep in thought, trying to be profound, I suddenly realized that I was not alone in the room. The hair on my body went straight up and I really knew I was not alone in the room. The feeling was so strong that, irresistibly, irrationally, and feeling so, I got up, checked outside my door, the bathroom, and on the balcony, nothing. The feeling continued, now back on the bed, more intrigued than anything else. I said, "Hello?" The feeling lasted a few minutes more, then vanished in an instant. I was even able to place the visitor in the room, straight ahead, to the left of the TV about halfway up the wall. I saw nothing visually, but my instincts told me exactly where it was. The next day, in my mind's eye, I was able to see the visitor, a beach ball-sized object protruding/bulging from the wall, black or white, depending upon your point of view, with lateral narrow V-shaped streaks going in both directions on its surface. Later, leaving the room, I met some of the hotel staff in the hall and told them that my room had a ghost. Their English wasn't up to it, so the girls just gave me that beautiful Thai smile they are famous for. The thing did not return and, oddly enough, I never felt afraid when I was there during or after the incident. You see, the thing is that earlier in Manila, I had visited my friends who were deep into the paranormal and meditation and, being a guest, I followed them around involving myself in everything they did, including their discussions, lectures, and meditations. Just before I left, one of my favorite friends there asked me if I was in touch with my guardian angel. I said no because, beyond the golden rule, I am not a practicing Christian. She assured me everyone had one and that I must try to make contact. She explained that I should write a note detailing what I needed, then burn it and see what happens. I promised her that I would try it. My first day in Bangkok, in my hotel, remembering my promise, I sat down and wrote a note. To be truthful, I did not mention anything for myself, I just asked that my friends in Manila be watched over. I took it out to the balcony, burned it and forgot about it. The last thing I said in the letter was the suggestion that the angel come by for a visit. Was that what happened? Did I get that visit, or was it a ghost? I don't know, but I tend toward the latter because of the timing. I must acknowledge, however, that we don't really know what we are interacting with in these situations. There is always the X factor, the visitor may be neither. Ultimately, we can do no more than judge them by their work. There were other paranormal incidents during that trip, but that was the most direct. I believe meditation was the key, enhancing my inherent abilities. Truly, that part of the world and its people are magical.
When I was growing up, my grandmother would rent a beach house on the Oregon coast, take the whole family every year. If you have ever been to the northwest coast, you know it has large rock cliffs jutting into the ocean. I have always loved climbing these rocks and going out onto them to watch the ocean. Anyways, one year when I was around 10, my cousin and I decided we wanted to go for a walk. So, after getting permission, we headed out up the road. Before long, we found a trail that was fairly overgrown leading in the direction of the coast. We decided to head up the trail and see what we could. This trail winded through the dense vegetation, and in the sandy path we could see many footprints. Before long, we exit the trail and find ourselves on top of one of the cliffs far enough into the ocean that we are surrounded on three sides by water. We are very excited with our discovery and quickly start climbing all over the rocks. A very short time later, we notice this old man looking every bit the casual beachgoer with a bright blue windbreaker, gray dockers, bushy beard, and little white dog. I get the feeling looking at him that he is a very friendly guy, kind of looked like Santa. He meanders over and says hi, and tells us to be careful up on these cliffs, seeing as how it is so windy. Easily 30 miles per hour winds. My cousin and I proceed to keep exploring, and this guy follows us, standing close by as we make our way around. We are being pretty stupid in running and jumping on these sharp wet rocks, leaning over the edge of the cliff to watch the water spray, etc., all in the high winds. So maybe he is just trying to be responsible. But at one point when we are leaning over the edge watching the ocean, we start to get a little nervous and say maybe we should head back. Soon, as we turn around to leave, that guy that had been following us is gone. We head back up the trail and are talking about that guy. Both of us thought it strange he was gone as soon as we decided to leave, and by the time we reached the trailhead we were convinced he vanished. We turned around and walked back down the trail looking for footprints left from his dog. We find no sign this guy's dog walked down the trail. There was no other way onto the cliff besides the trail. To this day, I don't know if he decided to carry the dog or if he really had just vanished. I do know that both of us were freaked out after not finding the footprints, and the coincidence of him showing up right after we did and leaving right as we decide to go. I have always felt he must have been our guardian angel, taking care of two stupid kids playing where they shouldn't have.
In the early 1980s, before I was born, my dad was working in the oil fields in Wyoming. He was a gauger, driving around to different remote facilities recording gauge levels and reporting them back to the company. He was at one site where he had to climb on top of a tank to read a gauge. He had just climbed to the top and was about to read the gauge when he clearly heard someone call out his name, Mike. Thinking it was odd because he thought he was completely alone and hadn't heard another truck pull up, he shouted back, "Up here." There was no response. Again he turned to read the gauge when he heard it again, "Mike." He decided to climb down and see who was looking for him. Just as his head lowered down the ladder past the top of the tank, he heard a loud pop followed by glass raining down on top of him. He climbed back up to find that the gauge he was about to read and record had exploded. It probably would have blinded him, maybe worse. Possibly even caused him to fall from the tall tank. He was shaken to say the least, even more so when he found that he was absolutely alone at the location. He searched high and low. No one was there. There was really nowhere to hide, and most of all there were no other fresh vehicle tracks on the dirt road leading in. After hearing this story, my mother convinced him to quit his job. She had never liked that he was always out in the middle of nowhere with no one else around, and considered this close call a warning. She said next time his guardian angel might not be so blatant. Fast forward over 20 years. Having all but forgotten my dad's story and subsequent career change, I found myself working in the oil field, as a derrick hand on a directional drilling rig. It's miserable work, but the pay is excellent. I was finally heading home after a long, freezing week on the monkey board, driving by myself with the radio turned off so I could concentrate on navigating the frozen, winding mountain road. Suddenly, as plain as day, as loud as a normal conversation, a voice from the back seat of my truck calmly said my name, John. My heart jumped into my throat and I slammed the brakes, sliding to a stop in the middle of the road. I turned around and looked in the back seat as all of the hairs on my body stood straight up, half expecting to find a coworker who had picked an unfortunate place to take a nap back at the drilling location. Nothing. Nothing and no one. Unlike my dad's story, mine did not have an immediately apparent reason behind it. No truck came barreling in the wrong lane around the corner. No avalanche fell onto the road where I would have been had I not stopped. But it took me a while to get my bearings and wits about me enough to begin driving again. I probably spent 10 or 15 minutes staring at the back seat of my truck, even digging through the week's laundry and searching my cooler for a rogue walkie-talkie or any explanation that could have resulted in what I heard. I will always wonder, had I not stopped, if some tragedy might have befell me later on the trip home. I'll never know.
My husband and I lived in our apartment in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. He got up at 6 a.m. to get ready for work. I was not in bed. It was early spring, almost the same as today. I thought I dreamt I went onto our balcony, still dark, the stars visible and beautiful for a change, that an angel landed beside me on the balcony. He had dark hair, a blue knee-length tunic and wings, white and blue, tall, slim and sinewy. I can't recall exactly all he said, not even his name, but a name I had known of in regards to angels. He lifted me up and we flew over the city until almost daylight. We could see so much. Then back to the balcony where he set me down gently on my feet. Gave me a hug, a kiss on my forehead, and said he'd be around even if I did not recognize him, to know when he was near. Then he flew off. By then the sky was cloudy, white in dark clouds as I watched him fly off and up. Then he completely blended into the clouds that I could no longer really see him. My husband felt the coldness coming in from a small opening of the glass balcony doors. He said,
"There you are. What are you doing out here?"
I just smiled sleepily and said I had needed some cool, fresh air. He told me I could have at least put slippers on because it was still too cold to be standing barefoot on the cement. He led me in, sat me on the sofa with a faux fur coverlet, and brought me a coffee he'd just made. I was asleep. So he made me a bit more comfortable without waking me, as I wake very easily. He came home for lunch and I was still in the same spot sleeping. I had not moved an inch, but I had a smile, he said. He woke me then as he'd brought me tea, Danish, watermelon and strawberries. The pieces of watermelon broke off looking like red hearts. We talked and ate until he went back to work. I stayed on the sofa for about 2 hours wondering if it had all been a dream. I still don't really know. It happened early spring 2011. I still do not know if I dreamt it or not, but for the fact my husband could not find me. He had looked, he said, but did not see me on the balcony until close to leaving for work, then after work asking me again what I was doing out on the balcony so early. After that he watched me closely, thinking I might have lied about not being a sleepwalker. And I am not a sleepwalker. It happened once or twice to me in my lifetime, which is 50+ years. And I had been very young in one, the other had been a post-hypnotic suggestion. This, however, felt very real, right to a couple of very fine feathers, white with a blue hue. I had those photos up on Facebook and YouTube, but I cannot find them now. My parents passed away a year later. I do not believe in only one all-seeing and omnipotent God. I believe there are many gods, goddesses, powers of the highest possible, which could be a computer for all anyone knows of it, but I do still believe in angels. Always have and always will. I would feel totally lost if I did not believe in angels. And trust me when I say I have had other angelic occurrences, and those have witnesses. So since my husband did not see or hear anything except the oddness of not being able to find me and then finding me in a place he already looked, I seriously do not know if it was a partial dream or real. I knew I started looking at houses out of the city the very next morning. Though I did not find this home until 2014, I suspect I was needed for my late parents and great uncle when they'd come into the city. Yet as soon as I saw this place, I knew it is where I am supposed to be. Just do not recall a reason I know I should be here, yet no. Maybe this is where I was brought during flight and told something. Blessings.
Here's a very strange car wreck story that happened to me when I was 19. The 2 weeks before the wreck, my mom had mentioned to me that every day while I was at work there were 2 white doves sitting on the roof of my car. They would be there from around 8 a.m. till around 5 p.m. every day. She said that a few times when she went out to get into her car, it was parked right beside mine in the driveway. The doves wouldn't even fly away when she shut the door, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway. There was only about 3 feet of space between the cars, and the birds would just sit there, and sometimes look right at her. She thought this was so odd that one day she took a couple photos of the birds. Fast forward to the night of the wreck. I got home from work around 6 p.m. Showered, ate, and watched some TV. Around 9:30 I left to head out to a party that a friend was having. The strange thing was that before I left I went into my mom's bedroom, told her where I was going, said I would be back at some point because I wasn't staying at a friend's or my girlfriend's house that night, and said love you, bye. Those actions were extremely odd for me for a few reasons. I went to a lot of parties when I was that age. So many parties that my best friend and I were voted class party animals in my senior yearbook. I was considered by most to be an alcoholic and drug addict at the time. I got drunk 3 times per week minimum, and the drugs were weed every day, pills, and a little coke a couple times per week. Since I was 16 I had never once told my mom where I was going anytime I went out to party. I usually wouldn't even say goodbye unless my mom happened to be standing near the door when I was leaving. I was a typical self-centered asshole teenager. A friend and I left the first party at around 11 p.m. after only drinking a couple beers and smoking 1 joint. We were heading across town to another party that my girlfriend was at. Another 2 friends were behind us and we began to race down the curvy country road. Something we did way too often. My car was pretty fast and I began to pull away fairly quickly. At some point the friends behind us slowed down, and within a couple minutes I could no longer see their headlights in my rear view mirror. I however didn't slow down and continued to go just above 100 miles per hour. There was a crest in the road ahead and we would hit that going fast all the time, because you could get some decent air time. I had probably done that jump no less than 15 times since I had gotten my license. When I was about 100 yards from the crest I remember looking at the speedometer. I was going 115 miles per hour, so I decided I should let off the gas and coast into the jump. I hit the jump probably going between 90 and 100 miles per hour. I got quite a bit of air, and when I landed the front left tire exploded. The rim of the wheel dug into the asphalt and immediately turned my car sideways. The sides of the road were lined with trees, and the last thing I remember seeing was those trees passing in front of me. It was almost like it was all in slow motion. According to the cops and EMTs, what likely happened next was I hit 1 tree, spun around, hit another tree, spun some more, then hit the last tree. I was ejected through the driver's side window, and landed about 50 feet from the car. Neither I nor my passenger were wearing our seat belts. If we were wearing seat belts, we both absolutely would have died. When I was ejected through the driver's side window, the passenger was knocked into the driver's seat, and the car was crushed around him, leaving just enough space for him to survive. We would have been crushed together if we were wearing seat belts. The friends I was racing with hadn't seen my tail lights for a while, and when they passed the spot of the wreck they couldn't see my car because it was 50 yards into the wooded area. What they did notice was there was a lot of dirt and dust in that area. When they got to the end of the road where it was flat land, and still didn't see tail lights, they thought we might have wrecked near that dirty, dusty part of the roadway, so luckily they turned around and headed back. This is the strangest part of the story to me. When they got to the scene of the wreck, they parked off the road and ran to where my car was. The passenger, Kyle, was trapped in the car and unconscious. He was in such an odd position, and there was so much blood that they instantly assumed he was dead and began to look for me. My friend, Tad, said that when he found me he assumed I was dead too, because of the blood and unnatural position my body was in. He said as he got closer he could see that my eyes were closed, and he said I was talking as if I was having a conversation with someone that wasn't there. I still remember this part like it was yesterday. I should mention here that I am agnostic, so I'm not a big believer in angels or anything like that. I don't remember actually seeing anything, so I can't say who or what I was talking to, but this is what I remember. The thing said something to me. I'm not sure what it said, but my reply was, no. Then it said something else, and my reply was, what about the passengers? I don't know why I said passengers plural, but I did. Then it said something else and my reply was, okay. Then I opened my eyes and Tad was screaming my name and crying. He was saying, Kyle's dead, over and over again, while he was helping me to my feet. He probably shouldn't have even tried to move me at all, but we were all in shock and just panicking. I got to my feet and we began to walk towards the car. Then Tad looked at me and said, sit down man, your legs are all messed up. I'll be right back. I watched him run to the car, then he started screaming, Kyle's alive, holy shit he's alive. I then started to look at my arms and legs. Tad was right, they were all screwed up. There was also a ton of blood going into my eyes, and I figured out my head was essentially cracked open and blood was just pouring out everywhere. A man and woman that lived in a house about 100 yards away came running up. I remember the guy saying, holy shit, it sounded like a bomb. The lady started freaking out, then ran back to the house to call 911. Cops and an ambulance came, and some EMTs began attending to me, while others began to use the jaws of life to cut Kyle out of the car. My mom is a very religious person and she believes the doves were a sign from God, and I was having a conversation with my guardian angel that night, but I'm still undecided. I used to think that the phrase, he was knocked clean out of his shoes, was just a commonly used exaggerated expression. Turns out it is not just an expression. The force of impact knocked me out of my shoes. Those shoes were Doc Marten 3/4 boots that were completely laced and tied tightly. One of the cops on the scene said those boots were still sitting on the floorboard of the car right next to the gas and brake pedals. Just before we left the party there were two friends that were going to ride with me. They were in the back seat, but my car was a small sports car, so the back seat was very small. At literally the last minute they decided to ride with another friend that was driving an SUV and going to the same party, because there was way more room for them. Both of those guys would definitely have died if they stayed in my car. The entire back of my car was completely crushed. Everybody always wants to know what injuries we both had, so here they are. Kyle's injuries were as follows. Broken neck, collarbone, pelvis, both legs, both feet, right arm in 4 places, left arm in 2 places, left wrist, crushed right hand, 3 broken ribs, dislocated jaw, dislocated left shoulder. My injuries were as follows. 2 broken ribs, left leg 2 places, right leg 3 places. All tendons attached to knees completely snapped, broken collarbone, dislocated left shoulder, broken left arm 2 places, multiple skull fractures, multiple lacerations to my face and neck, from going through the window. As you can see, I got off much easier than Kyle did. We both still have tons of hardware all through our bodies, and walk with slight limps. I obviously felt terrible for a very long time regarding what I put Kyle and his family through, but he wouldn't let me think like that when he was with me. Every chance he got, he would constantly crack terrible car wreck-themed jokes all the time. Over a decade later, we are still friends, and we still hang out occasionally. When we first saw each other a few months after the wreck, Kyle said in 10 years we will look back and laugh about this. He was right, our senses of humor are so dark, and we do laugh about certain aspects of that night to this day. Interesting side note, my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my dad all completely totaled their first cars in terrible crashes, and also barely lived to talk about it with multiple broken bones. 2 of them were also ejected from their cars, and not wearing seat belts. Pretty weird. Hopefully my son will break that cycle.
22 years ago yesterday, I was in a horrific automobile accident and I died in a ditch line on the side of the road. I had an out-of-body experience and 2 angels, one on each side, touched my shoulder and told me, my work is not done here, and just slowly pushed me down, and, long story short, I ended up in, sounds like Mobile or Noble, Kentucky, in the intensive care unit in a coma for 2 weeks, and as I came out of the coma, one of the most beautiful, Shirley Temple-Locks, red-headed woman was sitting there holding my hand. I had no clue who this lady was, and of course no way to vocalize anything because all of the tubes and everything that was down my throat, in my body and things, and she told me, "You're gonna be fine, you're gonna be okay." She was talking and I could hear her, but her mouth wasn't moving, and she said, "I'm going to get someone and I'll be right back." So, a few days later, when they had taken the tubes out and things, I asked all the nurses and all the hospital staff, just everything, trying to find this lady. I just wanted to thank her, and, she was such a great comfort at the time that happened, and to this day I don't know who she was or anything, and in my mind she has always been an angel.
This was back in March or April, end of April, 1966. I'd just gotten out of the Air Force. I was in the hospital. I had the New Testament completely through in about a week's time towards that end, and I really felt God was talking to me, wanting Him to serve me. One day I called my friend and I said, let's go up into the mountains and have a retreat, have a visit. And we had planned to do this, and he canceled out on me at the last moment, so I ended up going up alone. I don't think if I had gone up with him, this would have happened. I went up to Mount Constance, Lake Constance, or Mount Constance of the Olympic mountain range. It's a 7-mile hike. I was on my way up there and I met one couple on the way, and they gave me a fish. I put it in my knapsack for dinner, got up there, and it was getting pretty late already. I tied my knapsack to a tree. It was very cold, there was ice all around, ice on the lake. There was a spot around the tree about 30 feet in diameter that was clear ground, even though I had a down bag with me. It was laid down, so I got into my sleeping bag. It was starting to get dark. All of a sudden, there were 20 to 30 mountain sheep around me. Wild mountain sheep that were just starting to lose their hair. Really rough looking. They would be quiet for a few minutes, then all of a sudden they'd start making noise and running around, and I'd stick my head out and yell, and they'd kind of scoot off a little bit in the distance, and then they'd come back around and start milling around and moving around me. That happened all night. It kept me awake all night. By the time it was daybreak, I woke up, staggering, no sleep, threw my duffel bag together, got my knapsack, and head down the mountain. Got down to my car, which was only about 3 miles down the rough road to the highway. Got down to the highway and started driving, and I was so tired, I fell asleep behind the steering wheel and started hitting the bumps. This was the first year they had bumps on the highway, and that woke me up. Woke me up enough to say, "Jesus, you're gonna have to help me get home," and within a minute there were 2 men on the freeway that I picked up, and they kept me awake talking to me all the way into Olympia, about 30 miles away. I said, "Where can I let you guys out?" They said, "Right here will be a good spot," and it wasn't at an exit or anything. It was kind of on the farmland, dairy flats. I said okay, and I let them out. I looked out and there was hardly any traffic, so I pulled out, started to pull away, turned around to wave goodbye. Gone.
It was in the early 70s. I always slept on the top bunk of my brother's. We had bunk beds. We didn't have any air conditioning and it was really hot. It was in Mississippi. For some reason I went and slept on the couch in the living room that night, and I was laying there, and then all of a sudden I rolled over and I looked, and it was like 3 angels. They had an almost effeminate male characteristic with a glow around them, which I researched a bit, is called the glory of the glow. It was almost like a fog. I rolled back over and thought, wow, that was weird. And then, I don't know how much time passed, but I rolled over again and I saw them again, the three faces. They were just looking at me. Then I looked down at the couch and I realized I was maybe 3 feet off the couch. It was like they were holding me up off the couch. It felt like I was off the couch up in the air. I rolled back over and I said, man, this is getting to be a really strange dream. I'm not sure how much more time passed, but the next thing I know I'm standing up on the floor. I never got up off the couch, groggy, and woke up. I was standing on the floor. I was looking down at this little fan, portable fan, and it was on fire and the whole wall was on fire. There was all this black smoke in the house, so I ran and got my mom up and my sister and my brother, and we all ran outside, and I didn't tell my mom for like 2 weeks, and when I told her she was like, why didn't you tell me? They were angels who saved us.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentexts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.